think about, Okay, I'm recording.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like you got to address your fear of dying.
It's not so much dying. It's more it's having to live with like a chronic disease without help. Like having to go to the hospital or.
Yeah. Well, here's the. Yeah. How do you compare that to living with the, binging, for example? Think about that for a second, because the way you're living right now with food, is that not something you should be afraid of?
Yeah, I guess this is an unknown fear because I don't know what I'm dealing with. I don't know what the cause is.
Yeah, well, and we both know it's like you said, skin issues usually came up when you binged, right? And you know that,
Yeah.
But you binge anyways, right? And so some of it is manifesting, and once again, it's like if nothing, you know what? I honestly, overall, do you feel like if it is what it is what it is, and at this point it's happening? Or do you feel that you need to stress out about it? And what do you think the stress about it does to your body?
It makes it worse.
Yeah, because your body going into fight or flight, it naturally secretes sugar into your bloodstream. So you're diabetic when you're under stress like that, even if you're not eating. Did you know that?
No, say that again.
So all of us, myself included, when we're under intense stress, especially fear, so they found that blood sugar rises with different emotions, and the most powerful blood sugar increases occur with fear. Anger, fear are very highly stimulating to your body's breakdown of energy into glucose. So it has nothing to do with food consumption. Even if you're not eating, your blood sugar rises. So like we had moved 5 times in a 5-year period of time. And when we settled, I went and got blood work done, and I was diabetic. And I knew it was stress induced, so I didn't do anything about it. And a year later, it was gone. But that's because I have that education, right? I am educated on physiology, especially like we'd studied fight or flight when I was in college. So fight or flight is what they call like fear, anger response under threat, right? So you either fight or you flee under stress. So when you're under stress, they've studied this with, and this is like 100 years old, this type of science. It's new. It's not new. It's well known. It's established science around the human physiology. When you're under stress, your blood sugar rises naturally. The reason is because it provides fuel just in case you have to run from the bear, right? So
you're getting an extra insulin.
Yes, response. Yeah. Because of stress, not because you're eating. So people who have chronic stress can have chronic issues with blood sugar and insulin and other things. High testosterone and insulin. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, that could be an association to fight or flight. That would be a great thing to study. Right? So, yeah, your stress about your health can increase your blood sugar right there. That's why we go into, the work you have to do is to go into your fears, because if you can relax and go into acceptance, what happens to your fear? What happens to stress? You got it. So then what would naturally happen with your blood sugar?
It should get back to normal.
Yep. You got it. You got it. Because your organs can handle that. But I want you to think of this too, Heather, imagine you're under that type of stress and your blood sugar's high just out of just having heart palpitations and you're having cold sweats and your hair's raised and you're in your fear state. And imagine you're going to food while you're in that state, while your blood sugar's already high.
Yeah.
And they've actually studied digestion too under the circumstance. And they found that your entire digestive tract stops. It stops secreting gastric juices. Saliva isn't very good. And so anything you're eating under stress isn't digesting properly. It's your You're not gonna release enough bile. The pancreas isn't gonna function well. So you're not only have already high blood sugar, but you're probably also really causing a lot of stress to your intestines and your digestive problem. You'll have a lot of digestive problems too. But that has nothing to do with your weight. I would be the same. Every human body is that way, and so are dogs and other vertebrates they've studied. So that's kind of important, don't you think, when you're looking at how your stress response and what's going on with your body too?
Yeah,
I don't want to overwhelm you, but it's kind of like maybe incentivizing you to really kind of face some of these fears that you have so that you can relax. I know it sounds so easy, doesn't it, when I say it?
Well, it's hard to know. Yeah. It's like, okay,
yeah. Well, for example, I started to stress out about this skin issue. Okay, so what are you afraid of? At the moment, what were you afraid of back at the moment?
That it's going to keep getting worse, and it won't resolve itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not have to live with it.
Okay, so what you do, so here's how you approach it. Well, what if that is true? What if it's true? So stressing out about it, what's stressing out about it going to do?
Nothing.
It's going to make it worse, actually. Right? So if
I mean, if I wasn't stressed out about it healing, I wouldn't have gone to the doctor.
Well, there's a balance here. It's not all or nothing. It doesn't mean you don't go to the doctor. It just means you don't become, what's the word?
Neurotic?
Yes! There's a difference, right? If I have a mole that I think is questionable, if I'm not afraid to die of skin cancer, does that mean I don't go to the doctor to get the mole checked?
Right, okay.
Right, so you went radical. You went all or nothing. Right? So you have to really check that. Of course you're going to go to the doctor. You just go into it knowing if there's something terminally wrong here, you know what? I will accept it. I have to accept it. It doesn't help to sit there and be afraid of all sorts of shit when maybe that's the source of my ailments, is being afraid. You know, how much fear have you lived in, Heather, your whole life? How much fear?
A lot.
If you were to say of your time awake, the awake time in your life, what percentage of your waking life is in fear?
90%.
90%. So, of course you're going to have issues with blood sugar. Of course you're going to have digestive problems. Of course you might have some type of cystic issues. You know, you're stuck in fight or flight, right? And so, what are you afraid of? Last time we talked, we went into facing death, facing your fear, right? Because you're just perpetuating it by running away from it, right?
Yeah.
So this is just one example. This is just one example where I'm like, all right, here's an example of a stressor for you. And it all ultimately comes down to death. It really does. And for you, you're afraid of a miserable death. Well, if you're living at 90% fear, just think about that for a second. 90% of your waking life is in fear. Shouldn't you be afraid of that? You're going to be afraid. Could you imagine living 90% of someone's life in terror?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say, okay, maybe fear, maybe less, maybe not terror, but
yeah.
fear. I think I would.
Okay, well, terror would be if you faced it, right? So you're coping. Would you say you're coping with it?
Yeah, I'm coping.
Yeah, so what would happen if you stopped coping?
I would just ignore it like it wasn't there.
So you're repressing it. That's a coping mechanism.
mean, I went to the doctor. I can't tell if it's now getting better or not. But she told me to, give it 2 weeks. Or
Yeah.
if it got worse, 6 weeks, then to go back.
Oh, okay. So I understand what you're saying. I'm talking like in general now, not about that incident. So let's go into generally speaking. If you, with any trigger, right? Whether it's, oh my God, my skin, I have this autoimmune response. It could get worse. Holy shit. I'm going to die miserable. Right? I'm going to have these issues. I'm going to die miserable. That's just one example. But, think of 90% living in fear, how much you're coping with it, and what would happen if you stopped, if you stopped completely coping with your fear. What would happen?
I don't even know. What do you mean? I don't understand.
Let's think about, what do you do when you start to feel feelings of fear or fright or worry, anxiety? What do you do to cope? To make it go away. That's one thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the primary thing you do.
Sleep.
And sleep. Okay. And that could be a combination of eating, right? Because then you already have high blood sugar just from being in fear, and then you're eating, and then you're in a freaking coma, right? You eat and sleep. What would happen if you stopped eating? For those reasons, okay? So that's really important. You stopped eating for those reasons. What would happen? Completely remove the whole weight concept from this question, okay? Just, it doesn't matter. Whether you lose weight or not, that doesn't matter. If you remove eating from how you cope with whatever triggers the fear, right? What would happen if you didn't have food available at your fingertips? And you couldn't go get food, and food couldn't get delivered? What would happen with that fear?
I would just stay with my anxiety.
Well, don't you agree the fear would probably get bigger?
Yeah.
Because it kind of magnifies on itself, because one fear thought promotes more fear thoughts, and then all of a sudden you're like, your whole world is crashing down.
Yeah, like yesterday I was completely in fear, and then when I ate my lunch, even though I didn't overeat, I felt so much better. Just from
from distracting yourself. Yeah, it's not about the food. It's about distracting. It's like a weapon. It's like, I have my weapon next to me. Now I feel better because I have it right here. Right? So if we get rid of your weapons, think of it that way. What happens?
So you don't know, last time you told me the worst thing, just to imagine what the worst thing would be, and then to let go, just accept that's going to happen.
Well, yeah, go into it. Experience what that is. Question it. Look at it realistically. And if your fear is saying, you're going to die a miserable death, ask yourself if that's actually as bad as you think it is. If that's the truth of what's chasing you, I don't know if that makes any sense. If that's what's actually there, whatever you're afraid of, would you say it's been here for a long time now?
Yeah, I remember, it's like when I was a kid, I used to be afraid.
Yeah.
I just was afraid of, I'm sure it was some form or another in there, I think.
Yeah. And so that fear, I like to think of it as the Grim Reaper, right? It's been there, it comes and goes, it manifests with different things, but it's always there. And what is your instinct to do? Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Hide.
Yeah.
Run away. Deflect. Deny. Throw rocks at it. Be angry. Threaten it.
I don't know how to make it.
Well, just stay with me. I'm talking you through it right now.
Okay.
If you knew what to do, you would have done it, dearie. So what you're doing is actually what you're wired to do. Run, hide, deny, deflect. All of those are survival mechanisms. You haven't done anything wrong. Under that circumstance, I mean, what I'm suggesting you do is not our nature, right? If you feel that you're in danger, what does our nature tell us to do?
Fight or flight.
Run, exactly. Hide. Throw sticks. Get your armor. Fight it, right? And would you say that's been what you've been doing your whole life now? 90% of your day is making sure this goes away. Get it away, remove it, hide it, deflect. How many times in a day do you feel this come forward? That feeling of fear come forward. How often are you feeling that?
Well, I wasn't feeling it as much until this happened, like last week.
Yeah, well, and this is something that probably is really hitting a big fear of yours. So, yeah, it's like your sensitivity for you, a vulnerability for you is in this area, right? Physical ailments. Don't you agree? Yeah, you're kind of riding on the edge of that.
I can't go to the pool while this is going on.
Yeah. Yeah, you're riding on the edge. You're riding on the edge of this. Don't you? Do you see that? What I mean? Can you see why you'd always need to be kind of paranoid around physical ailments with what you're doing with food?
I want to be healthy.
So hold on a second. Of course you do, but you also want to eat food to the point that it gives you all these problems, right? So do you see what I mean? Of course you do. You don't want consequences. You don't want a consequence. You want to keep this relationship up with food because this food is your biggest defense mechanism, right?
Right.
So if you're playing with fire around physical ailments, can you see why you'd be paranoid around physical ailments? Because now you have consequences to this behavior with food. How are we going to get rid of that?
Right. I can't use food if I'm going to recover.
Correct. And now what I'm saying is let's look at the fear that is underneath every time you eat. There is a ton of fear going on here. 90% of your day is you're using your defense mechanism, running away from it, hiding from it, defending yourself is to eat food. So stop focusing on the body shit. Of course you're going to die and it's going to be miserable.
Okay.
Right? Your living is miserable. Your current state of living is miserable. We both get that, right? So of course you're still it's almost like you're still in denial to some degree around what's happening, even though it's right in your face. And you consciously know, or intellectually you're aware, you're like, of course, every time I binge, I get these skin issues. I kind of get that. But now it seems serious, so now it's real. So what does that do to your relationship with food? Because now food is the direct cause of what's going to cause a miserable death, right?
Right.
So now what happens? Because your need for food is to defend you from something else you're miserably afraid of. So do you see how you're like, there's a lot more than one thing going on here. You got layers of shit. And your physical ailments are, to me, as much as we can say, yeah, you're going to die of a heart attack any day now. Yes, you're going to have diabetes. Of course, you're probably living with it in your fear. You don't even need to eat when you have it. So that stuff is like, well, no shit, but you have to address what's underneath this relationship with food. And that's where we were with our last session. Our last session, we did it. It was a good session. Have you listened to that yet?
I listened to the first 10 minutes of it.
It was a
good session because it wasn't really good.
Because we're getting to the heart of this. So we need to get back down there. Do not let yourself get distracted by your fear of consequences.
Okay.
Because you got them already.
Okay.
You're right. So it's like, don't go down that vortex, because what's that doing with your relationship with food? Immediately you're going to start binging because you know you got to give food up. But you need your food because you got all these other side fears that you're dealing with too. Right?
Right.
So in terms of focus for you and how we're going to address this, don't get distracted by the like obvious side effects. You're not surprised. It's not like you're sitting going, Robin, I don't know how this is happening to me. Well, of course you do. You just don't want to go there because you've had this relationship with food that you're so codependent with, right? That it's like scary. If you give up food, what's going to happen? Terror is going to arise. That's why I said terror. You're coping, which is keeping the terror at bay. Make sense?
Yeah.
So if you stop eating when you're afraid, what's going to happen to that fear? Just go into that sense. So when you eat, you're like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about it right now. I feel like it's temporarily gone. It's like, okay, I found a hiding spot. Make sense? Even if it's not a binge, if you're using it for that reason, it's a hiding spot.
Okay.
Does that sound about right? In terms of how it feels.
I don't know. I get your point about, fixing the fear, because I know there's a lot of fear. I mean, anytime I've given up food in a program or something, I get lots of fear.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. So when you do get your food, if you had to describe it, wouldn't you agree? It's like, I'm safe, I'm hiding, what does that feel like to you? How would you describe it?
Like a hug, a warm hug.
Would you describe it as safe?
Yeah.
Protected, like protection? Yeah. Okay, that's what I meant by a hiding spot. Oh, I'm safe. Imagine you've been chased by a horrible monster and you find a cave where you are safe. It is safe from vulnerability, right?
Well, it's like a cave with the lights on and people around that are not crazy.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's still safe. It's like, okay, I'm safe for now. It gives you a sense of safety, or like another word would be like a hiding place. Because you're hiding from that feeling. What feeling is it?
That feeling of being afraid of.
Okay, so let me see if we can describe it a little bit more differently. The opposite of getting a hug and feeling protected is what?
Being attacked.
Being attacked. So would you say that feeling of fear kind of comes across like attack?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to make sense of it. I don't know the answer, so I'm just kind of trying to backtrack with you. So if the feel you're getting with food is safety, like, oh, I'm cared for, I'm loved, I'm like, then what's the opposition of that? I'm hated, I'm judged, I'm a failure, I want you to process through what that is. This is where you have to do this work. I'm guiding you. You're the one that has to do this. I can't make you do it. Even though I kind of am.
Like when I lived with my mom, I never felt safe because because of her anger outburst and because of her medical issues, I didn't know if I was going to come home to a dead person or someone who was, or blacked out from her low blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Who was a brittle diabetic.
Yeah.
I mean, there were many times where I had to just pour honesty down her throat to get her to come back to it.
And that would be traumatic for a child for sure. And so food for her was a lifeline too. Like, she needs food, it'll keep her alive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How often did that happen? Or was that something you were just afraid you'd have to do?
Oh, no, that happened a lot. Not when I was this small. I think I was, when did that start? I think I was like maybe 14 to when she died. Well, 25 when she died.
Mm-hmm.
But she would, the first indication would be when she started, like she would laugh like really inappropriately. Like it would be this large, cackling laugh. Or it would be, she would just start like sounding like one time it happened in front of a group of people, and they came and I was inside the house, and one of the guys, they were doing some work for us, and the guy came in there and said, "Your mom's drunk." And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
and they had given her some pizza, so by the time I got back out to the garage area where they were, she was fine, and she can't remember. She can't remember when that happened, so when I try to tell her, she's not aware of it. She doesn't remember. She's not aware of it happening. So.
Okay, so back to you feeling attacked.
Yeah.
So the opposite of you feeling so if you resolve these underlying this perception of your mother, what happens to your fear of being attacked?
If I resolve.
Yeah, if you forgive your mom for her issues and all that stuff, and that's the way she was, would it come across as I'm being attacked again?
Well, I didn't feel like it was her fault. I mean, I was just afraid that she was going to die.
Yeah, knowing what you know now, would you carry that fear so intensely? As a child, you didn't have any relative awareness around how it works or what's really going to happen, and it probably took you getting out of the house and getting older in your 20s to kind of see the picture a little clearer, right? So
back then that it wasn't her fault.
Yeah, but your fear didn't have any edges or boundaries to it because you're a child. You don't know what you don't know, right? So
I did not feel secure or safe at home because I was always working. I would get up in the middle of the night and check on her while she was asleep to make sure that she was indeed sleeping.
How did she manage this when you were younger? How did she do it when you were a child?
Well, in my opinion, she was not as sick as it progressed. The disease progressed as she got older.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know my uncle told me one time that he flew from North Carolina to Ohio because her father had heard it in her voice when he called her. So he made my uncle, her brother, fly to Ohio to check on him. And my uncle thinks that's why she moved back from Ohio to North Carolina, so that she could be around her family. Because the first time this actually happened that I was aware of, it happened as we were leaving work, and she was acting funny, but I didn't understand why. And she just drove to her mother's house, my grandmother's house, and I don't remember if she got out of the car or what.
Sure.
She made it to my grandmother's house, and then my grandmother kind of took over.
Okay, so let's go back to being attacked.
I guess attacked is the wrong word. It was more, I was afraid that my mother, who was my caretaker, was like I couldn't help her, like she was dying, and I couldn't.
You were afraid she was going to die.
I was afraid she was going to die.
Okay, so do you feel at this point you've resolved all that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's now go back to your issues with food that have nothing to do with this. Okay? Because if you've resolved that, this has nothing to do with that. Right? It's not like if you don't eat, you get that feeling your mom's going to die again.
Right.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with this. So let's go back with let's find out what does. So, and again, it's like ultimately everything breaks down to fear of death. Because your thought at the time as a child, which a child should think this way, is if my mother dies, I can't handle it. I will die too. My happiness will be gone forever. I can't handle it, right? Of course, a child is going to feel that way, right? So when you eat, that feeling of safety arises. The feeling of I'm being taken care of. All is good for now. What it would happen if you didn't get that taken care of? What would happen if you didn't have shelter? Feel it. Go inside that space and go, well, this is what it feels like. And obviously I get this relief when I do eat. If I don't eat, what happens? It would feel like what?
Just, I guess, being completely alone.
Yes. And what does that feel like? Like how would that come across emotionally? Because you could say, well, I'm afraid to be alone. So what happens when you're alone? Why would you?
Now in the desert alone by myself, waiting for the lion to come and eat me.
Okay, so terror. So do you see what I mean? That's like terror would come up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's there. Terror. Terror. That's what's there.
I don't know what's beyond that. I mean, I know.
Well, you'd have to sit in it. You'd have to sit in it to find out, because we're just sitting here without it occurring, thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because if it is there, and you're not willing to face it, you kind of have to eat for the rest of your life. And how long is that life going to end up being now? You know?
Yeah.
Do you see that clearly? This fear has always been there. It always comes back. It comes back, and sometimes it's way worse. But you don't give it a chance to be there. So, and the way you get rid of it is through dieting, both. It kind of goes both ways, but through eating. How are you gonna, if it's there and the only way you get rid of it is to eat, how are you going to stop eating if you're not willing for it to be there? What would happen if you let it be there without eating? Without trying to find a different type of escape, right? What would you do?
It occurred to me that it could be resolved.
Well, you gotta look. Well, doesn't it make sense? How are you going to resolve something you're not looking at? You escape it as soon as you feel it. There it is. I'm going to eat. Gone. Don't have to address it. Don't have to look at it. Oh, thank God, right? Because it's going to kill me. Terror.
Yeah.
So if you never face it, what's the likelihood you're going to stop eating the way you are?
Okay, I get it.
Good. It should feel like, no shit, Robin.
Yeah,
yes.
I guess I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. I just thought I wasn't going that much into it. I didn't.
Well,
I
because
get it now. I just got to see it.
you have to let it, and it's going to feel like terror.
Yeah.
I had to do this too. I would do the same thing. So for me, that fear would come up in a variety of ways. Clearly, it was primarily attached to food. Okay, so food brought terror to me, but I would also get terror if I couldn't eat. So it was both directions for me. So I would have that feeling of terror arise at its worst 15, 16 times a day. So my whole day was based around not just binging, but having to purge it because I was having terror around gaining weight too. So when I felt like I was gaining weight, that terror arose. When I felt like I messed up my diet, that terror arose. If I felt like I wasn't allowed to binge, the terror came back up. So it was attached to a lot of different things circulating around my weight, you know, and so it was pretty horrific. So if I gave up dieting, it would show up. If I didn't allow myself to eat, it showed up as well, right? It was a multifaceted trigger around food and my weight, and food and my weight, and food and my weight. And dieting, because dieting would make it go away too. If I could control my food, oh, it went away. But if I couldn't eat something I needed, it would come back. Make sense?
Yeah.
So for you, it might not be super multifaceted. It could be really just one main trigger, which still sucks. It still is the same terror. And what I had to do, because I was done, I was like, done. I can't live this way anymore. I can't eat. I can't do anything. So I remember, I had decided to commit suicide, and I had made my last phone call to my father. And he's like a psychotherapist. He's got a master's, he's got a PhD. He works with schizophrenics. He works with trauma, super traumatized people with PTSD and all sorts of stuff. And I just remember thinking, I just don't know what to do. And I think he probably could tell that I'd kind of given up. But I wasn't about to tell him I was going to commit suicide because I didn't want him to stop me. And he had said, you know, Robin, you just need to let what arises to be there. And he had said to me, and it might feel like you're going to die or it's going to kill you. And you have to be willing to sit in that and do nothing and just have faith, or just open yourself up to find out. And you're going to realize when it comes and goes that it didn't kill you, even though it feels like it's going to. And I remember thinking, he has no idea how bad this is for me. Like, he has no idea. Because he seems to think that you can just sit through this shit, right? I did. I kind of chuckled in the back of my head going, he's clueless. He has no idea that this is, like, bad. Like, I don't, but I think he actually kind of did intuit what I was going through. But I'm about to give you the same exact recommendation that my father gave me that moment. Because I remember actually contemplating his advice. Going, well, why? Well, if I'm going to commit suicide over all these coping mechanisms, and I'm not, but isn't like killing myself the same as that feeling that I'm running away from? I mean, what is it going to take for me to pull the trigger, right? Blow my brains out. That's going to feel the same way as that terror. I'm going to be in terror to commit suicide. So what's the loss? Like, why can't I just do this for once? At least give it a try before I commit suicide. The first time I did it, okay, the first time I sat, I felt so sorry for myself. I remember having such a pity party. Poor me. I can't go exercise. I can't do anything. I just remember feeling so sorry for myself. God, there's something going on with the phone. It's like breaking up and... Can you hear that?
Oh, okay.
That's way better.
I didn't say anything. I was just listening.
I know, but there's all this like noise coming back at me for some reason. Like, oh.
I have you on speaker. I keep forgetting to take you off. Sorry.
Oh, that could be why. I don't know. How does this sound to you? How does it sound to you right now? Worth a try?
Yeah, it's worth a try. I didn't realize that I was doing that. I just thought I was being rational or irrational.
Well, I would agree with you. In the moment, it feels rational because the terror underneath that, don't you agree it's rational to do something about it? I mean, think about that. You are rational. Yeah. With those feelings that are like super frightful, super, like I said, you're coping. all those coping mechanisms are like so hardwired. You're not wired to sit in terror and go, oh, this feels good. I'm like freaking out. I'm going to get murdered. I should just sit there and let it happen. That's not how we're wired. So I would agree with you. It's a rational decision under the circumstance for you to do something to escape it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
So what we need to do at this point, because you're trying to escape this feeling 90% of the time, and your mechanism is to eat. What do you think is going to happen to any individual with that relationship? What's going to happen to their body?
It might break out in a rash.
Yeah. And you're going to gain a lot of weight, right?
Oh, I thought you said well, you don't eat and then you still have the terror.
No, if you eat, what do you think? Let me rephrase this. Any person who has fear and terror, and you can say that's not all or nothing. It's like a volume control, because you can say some fear is manageable and then other fear, the volume turns up and you got to do something about it, right? When your fear, and I assume your fear is kind of turned up a lot. Like you don't have just fear I can handle. You have fear that all fear to you probably feels like I can't handle it because it's turned up. If your way of defending yourself or hiding or escaping or denying or repressing or avoiding, getting rid of it, right? If your way to get rid of it is to eat food, what's going to happen to your body?
I'm going to gain weight.
Yeah, especially if that terror comes up a lot, right? So imagine how often a time in a day you have that feeling and what it takes to get that feeling to go away. You can say some people have it twice a day and it takes like a binge to get rid of it. So they binge twice a day, right? You can say some people have it all day and they eat all day. Some people, so there's, whatever the equation is for you, it's enough that your body is now in a position to where it is significantly, it's affected your mobility, your organs, your fight or flight response, your blood sugar. I mean, it's been a long time of you're using food to hide from this fear multiple times a day over the course of decades. You see what I mean by you're probably paranoid you're going to have physical ailments. And when is it going to happen? Right? And like I said, it's like, and as soon as something happens, it's like all of a sudden I have to look at my relationship with food, which I need to survive.
Yeah.
Right? So let's look at the relationship you have with food in terms of that need to remove the threat or the fear. So if you're going to resolve these issues with food, what do you have to face?
Whatever comes up.
Yeah, you do. And you have to look at it and you have to ask questions. One way I visualized it for me, it's like, because it was the same feeling manifesting with, like I said, if I felt fat, it showed up. If I felt, if I was restricted from food, it showed up. If I binged, it showed up. If I didn't purge, it showed up. If I didn't exercise for 2 hours. So it came across in more than just one way, but it was the same feeling. Mm-hmm. I described it was like a nightmare. It was like I'm being chased by it felt like whatever it is, it's dark. And it's going to dismember my body. I'm going to suffocate. It was torture. You kind of just described the same thing when you're like, I'd be in the middle of the desert and all the animals and the hyenas are coming to pull my body apart. It's like, yeah, you got it. Terror. That's what's underneath it. You probably just don't let it get that far, right? You go right to your mechanism. Get rid of it.
Right.
So if you...
I was always searching for food and always stealing food because it allowed me to cope with how I was feeling without having to depend on anyone else or ask anybody.
Right, and because you couldn't rely on anybody else. So you found something to cope with, not knowing that feeling that was underneath it was the actual source of the problem, not the food. Your food isn't the problem. Remember we talked about that. It's like, it's not the taste of the food. It's the relief you get from the terror. that's what you're getting out of it. Right?
Yeah, it's with anything. It's terror, it's loneliness.
Well, all of that. Okay, all of that ultimately is going to bring up terror. So loneliness, if you don't feed it, what's going to happen to that loneliness? It's going to start feeling like you will be, that you're nothing. There's nothingness under loneliness. I don't exist, non-existence. There's these feelings of really that are quite primal and wired to prevent you from dying is what it really is. Psychological manipulation to keep you alive, even though your mechanism of fighting and fleeing is killing you. It's killing you.
So let me ask you, I mean, I live by myself, and I'm not sure I want this one put out there on any YouTube or anything.
Hold on, let me pause this then.